My name is Walter Hensley, and I am 75 years old. 2 weeks ago, my son stood in my kitchen with his wife beside him and spoke to me as if my life was no longer mine to live. He didn't ask me what I wanted. He told me what was going to happen. "Dad," he said, "we've talked about it. We're selling your house to pay off our debt. You'll move in with us after the sale. It's for the best." His wife, Vanessa, stood there with her arms crossed, acting like the decision was final. She didn't show emotion, not even fake sympathy. She said, "This house is too much for you anyway. It's time you let it go." I looked around the room, seeing the home I built with my own hands. The wooden beams above me still held the marks where my wife, Nora, and I measured our children's height every year. Her handwriting was still on the kitchen wall in faint pencil lines, marking Lily's first steps. Every part of this home carried a memory that could never be replaced. But to my son and his wife, this house was not a home. It was an answer to their financial problems. Daniel slid a stack of papers toward me and said, "All you need to do is sign. We already found a buyer who is willing to pay above market value. This is a blessing for all of us." Vanessa smiled slightly, but it was not warm. It was the smile of someone who had just won. I could tell by the way Daniel avoided looking at the family photographs on the wall that he knew this was wrong. But he was desperate. Their debt had swallowed them, and instead of fighting their way out, they decided to sacrifice the one place that had always been safe. I picked up the pen, signed the papers, and handed them back with a smile. My son sighed with relief. Vanessa clapped her hands together softly and said, "Perfect. You won't regret this." But in that moment, I already knew something they did not. They believed they had taken control of my future. What they didn't realize was that I had already secured it. On closing day, when they walked into the attorney's office expecting to meet the buyer, they were smiling confidently. But the moment they saw who was sitting there, both of them froze. Daniel turned pale. Vanessa's eyes widened with shock before she slammed her hand on the table and shouted. That was the day their plan collapsed in front of them. What happened next changed every relationship in our family and taught a lesson that money can never purchase. If you believe a person should have the right to decide their own life, especially in their final years, stay with me until the end. Be sure to subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because this story is not just about me, it's about every parent who has ever been taken for granted. Before any of this happened, my life was quiet and steady. I lived in the house my wife and I built together 43 years ago. Every brick, every floorboard, every rosebush in the backyard held a story. My wife, Nora, passed away 3 years ago, and since then, this home had been my way of staying close to her. I still kept her teacup on the kitchen counter. I still whispered goodnight when I passed our bedroom door. I was not lonely. I had my routines. Every morning, I fed the birds that gathered near the oak tree in the yard. After that, I would sit in my workshop building small wooden toys for my granddaughter, Lily. She loved helping me paint them bright colors and would say, "Grandpa, this house smells like happiness." Her words were the reason I woke up each day with purpose. Daniel, my son, used to be a thoughtful young man. He loved this house as a child and once told me, "Dad, I want my kids to grow up running through this yard the way I did." But somewhere along the way, life hardened him. He married Vanessa, a woman who measured success in numbers instead of memories. She never called this house a home. She called it property. They lived 2 towns over in a large house they could not afford. Daniel worked in finance. Vanessa ran an online business. They drove luxury cars, took expensive trips, and posted photos to show the world how successful they were. But behind all that, their debt was piling up. At first, Daniel called me asking for help with little things. A small loan here, a payment there. I never said no because he was my son. I believed helping him was right. But slowly, his tone changed. His calls were no longer requests. They were expectations. Then one day, Vanessa called me directly. She did not ask how I was doing. She got straight to the point. "We need liquidity," she said. "You're sitting on idle wealth. It's irresponsible to let a house just sit there when it could solve everything." Her words cut deep. This house was not idle. It was sacred. It was the last piece of my wife's life on this earth. But the pressure built day after day. Daniel told me they were being threatened with lawsuits. Vanessa told me creditors would come after me next if I didn't help them. They played on fear, not love. Still, I stayed silent, not because I agreed with them, but because I had already decided what I would do. I was not going to lose my home. I was going to choose who it belonged to. And on closing day, that choice would stun them into silence. The pressure to give up my house did not come in one sudden moment. It came slowly, like a tide rising around me, while I was expected to stand still and drown quietly. It began with polite suggestions. Then came persuasive speeches about responsibility and family unity. Soon, it no longer sounded like concern. It sounded like a command. Vanessa was the one who led every conversation. She never once asked what I wanted. She spoke as though my future had already been signed away. One Sunday afternoon, she arrived at my house unannounced, wearing an expensive blazer and holding a laptop. She sat at my dining table and opened a presentation as if pitching to a business client. "This is the current value of your property," she said, pointing at a graph. "This location is prime. You are sitting on equity you don't need. It's financially irresponsible to keep it when we could use it to settle our debt and start fresh." Daniel stood behind her, silent, shifting uncomfortably. He would not meet my eyes. I poured myself a glass of water and said calmly, "This house is my home. It's not a financial instrument." Vanessa didn't like that answer. She leaned forward. "With all due respect, you are not in a position to live alone anymore. You need care. We are trying to help you transition before something happens." Transition. That was her word for taking control. Then she added, "If you sell now, you can live with us in our basement suite. It's fully finished. You'll have everything you need. Live in their basement." The house I built with my wife's hands was being traded for a space beneath theirs, like I was luggage to be stored away. I looked at Daniel, waiting for him to defend me. Instead, he said, "Dad, Vanessa is right. We already talked to an agent. It's a good offer." That was the first crack. Over the next few days, they escalated. Daniel started coming alone, but it was clear his words were hers. He told me they were drowning in debt. He said, "Dad, if you don't help, we could lose everything. Do you want your granddaughter to see us homeless?" Using Lily as a shield, another line crossed. I stayed quiet, observing. I was not confused or indecisive. I was watching to see how far they would go, whether there was any part of their heart left uncorrupted by fear and greed. The answer came one afternoon when I walked into my bedroom and saw Vanessa sorting through my late wife's belongings. She had taken Nora's quilt, the quilt Nora hand-stitched the year our first child was born, and tossed it in a donation box. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Vanessa didn't even turn around. "We need to declutter before the showing. Buyers don't want to see old things. This place needs to look fresh and modern if we want top dollar." Old things. That's what she called my wife's memories. That quilt held 40 years of history, birthdays, winters by the fire, Lily falling asleep on Nora's lap, and Vanessa tossed it aside like trash. I picked up the quilt and held it gently. "This is not clutter," I said. Vanessa sighed impatiently. "Walter, your emotional attachment is what's holding this family back. You had your time in this house. You need to let go." In that moment, something changed inside me. I no longer felt anger. I felt clarity. I realized she did not see a man who built a life. She saw a barrier to her lifestyle. The next day, she brought the real estate agent over without telling me. Strangers walked through my home, commenting on how this wall can be knocked down, and we could put an island here. It was as if I had already been erased. Daniel watched from the corner, eyes glued to his phone. Lily stood near the staircase with tears in her eyes. She whispered, "Grandpa, are they taking your house?" I knelt beside her and said softly, "No one can take what is protected by truth." Later that evening, when the agent presented the offer and placed the final sale documents in front of me, Vanessa stood tall and confident. "This is your chance to do the right thing," she said. I took the pen. I looked at my son. I looked at the woman who had reduced my life to numbers. Then, I signed the papers. Vanessa smiled in victory. Daniel exhaled in relief. They had no idea they had just signed away their own plan, because I had already chosen the buyer. And the person walking into that closing room would not just buy a house. They would restore everything that mattered. The night I signed the papers, Daniel and Vanessa went home celebrating, certain they had won. They believed I had given up. In their eyes, I was an old man who had no fight left, someone who would simply accept whatever was decided for him. But what they did not understand is that surrendering is not the same as losing. Sometimes you nod your head not because you agree, but because you are done arguing with people who have lost their way. That was the moment I chose not to fight with words, but with wisdom. I spent that evening walking through each room of my house, touching the walls, the furniture, the family pictures. I looked at my wife's favorite reading chair near the window, where she used to sit with her knitting. I could still imagine the sound of her laugh. I didn't cry. I just breathed in the memories and promised her I would protect what mattered, not for money, not for pride, but for dignity. I knew I couldn't stop the sale, but I could decide who I was selling to. 2 days later, I made a quiet drive to the town 1 hour away. There was a small assisted care center there, where my wife had spent her final months. The nurse who cared for her, Amelia Grace, had stayed after hours with us during the hardest nights. When my wife was too weak to speak, she held Amelia's hand and said something I never forgot. "Promise me you will look after Walter if I can't." At the time, I thought it was just emotion, but those words stayed with me. Amelia had once told me she dreamed of opening a recovery home for widows and single elderly women who had nowhere to go, a place full of warmth and healing, not a facility, but a home. As I walked through the care center door, Amelia looked up in surprise. "Walter?" she said with a smile. "What brings you here?" I sat down and told her everything, not in anger, but in honesty. When I finished, she sat quietly for a moment and then said, "Your wife told me this would happen one day. She knew your heart, and she trusted you to protect your legacy." I pulled out the documents and said, "Amelia, I want you to be the buyer. You will hold the deed. The house will become what Nora wanted, somewhere people can heal, not somewhere greed can profit." Amelia's eyes filled with emotion. "Are you sure, Walter? That is a precious gift." "I'm not giving you a house," I replied. "I'm giving you a promise fulfilled. You will become the steward of my wife's legacy, and in return, I will live there for the rest of my life, peacefully, surrounded by what she built." She nodded and said, "Then I accept, but only under one condition. You will not be a tenant. You will be the heart of that home. It will remain yours." We signed the private contract the very next morning. My attorney filed the documents with a clause, life estate protection. It granted me permanent residency rights until my passing and full operational control over the home's use. Daniel and Vanessa had no legal standing over the house. Once the sale was finalized, Amelia would own the title, and they could not reverse or contest it. While they bragged to their friends about liquidating my assets, I was putting the final protection in place. From that moment on, I felt a peace I hadn't felt in months. I was not hiding, I was rebuilding. As the closing day approached, Daniel and Vanessa became more controlling. They began sending me packing lists, telling me which of my own belongings I could bring to their basement. They even told me they had already converted my tool shed into a gym space for themselves. Vanessa said over the phone, "Don't worry, Walter. It's going to be good for you. You'll have people around you all the time. You shouldn't be alone at your age." I replied calmly, "Thank you for arranging everything. I'm ready." She heard surrender. What she didn't hear was resolve. The night before closing, I sat at my kitchen table, lit a single candle, and placed my hand over my wife's photograph. "It's done," I whispered. "Your house is safe." The next morning, I put on my best suit, not out of pride, but out of respect, for the home I had protected, for the life I had built, and for the truth I was about to reveal. They thought the papers they forced me to sign had handed them victory, but what they didn't realize was that I had just placed the final piece on the board, and when that door opened at the closing table, Everything they believed they had taken would be stripped away in one single moment of truth. Closing day arrived with a stillness in the air that made every sound feel louder than usual. I reached the attorney's office early and sat in the waiting area, hands folded calmly in my lap. I was not nervous. I was not uneasy. I had already lived through the hardest part, the betrayal. What was about to happen was not revenge. It was truth being given a voice. A few minutes later, I heard the quick tapping of heels. Vanessa entered first, wearing a tailored suit and a confident smile, acting like this was the biggest business victory of her life. Daniel followed, eyes tired but hopeful. They were already talking about how soon the payment would process and how they would finally be free. "Dad," Daniel said cheerfully, "this is a fresh start for all of us. You'll love living with us. We redid the basement and got you new furniture." Vanessa placed her hand on his arm and added, "It's better this way. You won't have any responsibilities. We will handle everything." I simply nodded. We were called into the closing room. There was a long polished table, a stack of papers neatly arranged, and 3 empty chairs across from us. Daniel and Vanessa sat beside me, still smiling. The attorney entered, carrying the final documents. Then the door opened again. Amelia Grace walked in. The moment Vanessa saw her, her smile collapsed. She blinked twice in confusion, then turned sharply toward me. "Why is she here?" Vanessa demanded. "This is a private family agreement." The attorney calmly responded, "Mrs. Hensley, this is a legal closing. All parties are present." Daniel looked back and forth between us, trying to understand. "Dad, what is this?" Amelia sat down across from us, placed her copy of the deed on the table, and slid it forward. Her voice was calm and steady. "As of this morning, the property has been transferred into my name under a life estate trust. Walter will remain in the house for the rest of his life. Upon his passing, the home will be used as a sanctuary for widows in need." Vanessa's mouth dropped open. "This is a joke. You can't do that. We already had a buyer." "You did," the attorney replied. "And here she is." "This woman is not family," Vanessa snapped. I finally spoke. "Family is not defined by blood. It is defined by loyalty, care, and love." Daniel's face slowly turned pale. "Dad, you sold the house to her. For what? Why?" I turned to him gently. "Because your mother trusted her. Because she kept her word when you forgot yours. Because she sees the house as a home, not as a bank account." Vanessa shot up from her chair. "This is illegal. You tricked us." The attorney kept his patience. "You insisted he sell. You pressured him to sign. He followed your request. He simply chose his own buyer. That is his legal right." Vanessa's face twisted in disbelief. She pointed at me. "Do you understand what you've done? You have left us with nothing." I looked at her calmly. "No, Vanessa. I have given you something far more valuable, a lesson you refused to learn willingly. You believed money was power. You believed control was love. Today, you learn that neither is true." Daniel leaned forward, his voice trembling. "Dad, we needed that money. We were counting on it. We're drowning." "I know," I said quietly. "And instead of asking for help with humility, you came for my life's foundation, with entitlement." Then I turned to him fully. "Son, this house was not mine alone. It was your mother's dream. It was her heart. And you tried to erase her memory for financial gain. That is a debt no money can repay." The room went silent. Tears streamed down Daniel's face. His hands shook as he ran them through his hair. Vanessa stood frozen, unable to speak, trapped between disbelief and rage. Meanwhile, Amelia signed the final document. The attorney stamped it. It was done. As we stood to leave, Lily suddenly entered the office, having been brought by a family friend. She ran to me and wrapped her arms around my waist. "Grandpa, are you coming home with me?" she asked. I picked her up gently and said, "Yes, sweetheart. I am staying exactly where I belong." Vanessa rushed toward Lily. "Lily, come here. We're leaving." But Lily clung to me tighter. She whispered, "Mom said we were selling your house, but you're still going to live there?" I nodded with a soft smile. "Yes, because some things are not for sale." Daniel broke down completely then, covering his face with his hands. He understood. He had not just lost a house. He had lost a piece of himself in trying to take it. As we walked out of the office, I felt no anger, no triumph. I felt peace, because I had protected the last promise I ever made to my wife, and now the healing could begin. When we walked out of that closing office, it felt as though a great storm had finally passed, not because everything had been resolved, but because the truth had finally been spoken aloud. For the first time in a long while, I was not carrying a burden. I was free. Amelia drove me back home, and Lily insisted on riding with us. She held my hand the entire way, asking questions the whole time in her innocent voice. "Grandpa, are you happy? Is the house yours forever? Can I still come and stay with you every weekend?" "Yes," I told her. "This house will always be here for you. It's not going anywhere." She looked out the window and smiled. In that moment, I saw hope in her eyes. Hope I'd not seen in her parent for a very long time. When we arrived at the house, I stepped out of the car and stood on the gravel driveway, looking at the home that carried a lifetime of memory. The sun was beginning to set, covering the sky in warm colors, neither dramatic nor loud, just peaceful. My spirit felt the same. A few minutes later, another car pulled up. It was Daniel. He stepped out slowly, without his wife. His tie was loosened, and his shoulders dropped, no longer trying to appear powerful. He stood across from, silent, as if struggling to find the right words. Finally, he said, "Dad, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even forgive myself." I didn't say anything. I wanted him to speak from his heart. He looked down at the ground. "I let money become my master. I let Vanessa convince me that your life was just a resource. I forgot what this house meant, not the walls, the memories. I forgot who you are and who Mom was." His voice cracked when he mentioned his mother. For the first time, I saw the boy I raised still inside him, the boy who used to run through these halls laughing, asking for bedtime stories, helping his mother bake cookies. Somewhere along the way, that boy had gotten lost in the world, but maybe now he was finding his way back. "I don't know how to fix this," Daniel whispered, "but I want to try. I want to be a better son." I nodded. "Trying is where healing begins," I said, "but it has to be real, not for money, not for what you lost. It must come from who you choose to become." Tears filled his eyes as he asked, "Can I still come here? Not to take anything, just to visit." "This house is not mine anymore," I said gently. "It belongs to something greater now. But yes, you may come, as a son, not as a claimant." A long silence passed, but it was not a painful one. It was the kind of silence that lets wounds breathe. As Daniel turned to leave, Lily ran over and hugged him. She said, "Daddy, Grandpa said this house is forever." Daniel looked at me with gratitude, and in that moment, I saw a new beginning. Not guaranteed, not perfect, but possible. Vanessa did not return that day. In the following weeks, I heard from others that she had left Daniel's home, unable to accept what had happened. She had built her life on control, and when control was taken away, there was nothing left beneath it. She was not my enemy. She was a woman who lost herself to greed, and while I felt no anger toward her, I felt no need to chase her either. Some people must face their own reflection before they can see the truth. Life in the house returned to peace. Amelia began preparing one of the spare rooms to welcome the first widow in need, a gentle named Margaret, whose husband of 50 years had passed without life insurance or a pension. She had nowhere to go. When she stepped into the house, she ran her hand along the wall and began to cry, saying, "It feels like love." That was the moment I knew I had made the right decision. This house was never meant to be sold. It was meant to continue its purpose, to hold people, to heal hearts, to remind the forgotten they are still worthy of. Some evening, I sit on the porch with Lily on one side and Margaret on the other. We watch the sun lower behind the trees, coloring the sky with gentle gold. I feel no bitterness, only peace. I protected my wife's legacy. I protected my home. But most importantly, I protected my soul from being sold to fear. The house was not a gift to the world. It was a gift from love itself, a reminder that dignity is not negotiable, loyalty is not for sale, and family should never be built on greed. If this story touched your heart and you believe that love is more powerful than money, make sure to subscribe right now and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to hear your voice, because your story matters too.